Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along and thanks for having me. My name is Bradley Kulisic and I'm here to talk about playlists. I don't curate them, but I interact with them from a fan perspective and also from all my work in music industry, in labels and distribution. I currently work for UK folk label Hudson Records and I run my own, hang on, there we go, label services and artist management company called Singing Like Music. So yes, I think the topic that was put together, as in the line was, artists feel a lot of pressure to get playlist coverage for their music. We will discuss the fundamentals of playlists, what they are, why they're important, how and when to pitch, but also the limitations of playlisting. So I guess we'll get into a bit of boring background first. So here we go. I started work in music in 2002. The context for this was when CD sales had reached their apex and were on the decline, and vinyl was just for the heads, and digital wasn't mature in any way at all, in that the iTunes store didn't start until after this, piracy was rampant, yada, yada, yada. So there I am, getting on board this train that's whizzing downhill very, very fast. So in context of playlists, we're not going to talk so much about streaming, but playlists and specifically how to get into playlists, what they are, why they're important, how and when to pitch. Spoiler alert, like all other aspects of releasing and promotional marketing, playlisting is just but one element, but we'll get into that now. Right, so what are playlists? Much like a radio program or a sequence of songs scheduled into Winamp or put on an iPod or a mixtape or a mix CD like this, they give us a way to basically create specific individual sequences of music. It's these sort of formats of the mixtape and the mix CD that sort of gives us the insight of how playlists work at the moment. Where I'm going to go, I'm going to read this bit because I added this bit a bit earlier. Where I'm going to go with this chat is to try and speak to the artists here. I know from my experience that artists feel a lot of pressure to get playlist coverage for their music, but in that broad strokes, that primarily means Spotify playlist additions. So we use Spotify as the lens to discuss all this and how to pitch for their various strands of playlists, curated playlists, algorithmic playlists, and their third-party playlists. The reason being to use Spotify, which I'll get into in a little bit, is everyone else uses roughly similar systems, but Spotify's is more mature, there's more ease of access and all that sort of stuff. So we use that and then it's relatively transposable to the other platforms. When did playlists become so important? So I'll probably just read this bit out. In the current but sustained music industry, golden goose in the sense, like people go, oh, I need to be on playlists, much like, oh, I need to get sync, like people have said in the past, and I need to get festival performances. There's just a thing that people focus on. Yes, there is revenue there, but also we know from streaming that revenue isn't, huge all the time. Further focus on streaming as a mainstream thing since the arrival of Apple Music in 2015 has really put focus on streaming and playlisting as well. And when Spotify updated Spotify for Artists in 2016, it started to show a lot of data, make things very visible, made artists compare and despair in a sense compared to what other artists were achieving. Other artists they thought that they might be better or make better music of, were getting results and they might not be. So that caused a lot of friction and you want things that you haven't got. In the wider context of the music industry, streaming is driven in large part by playlisting as a unique offering to streaming services. You play whatever you want, whenever you want. This has driven the industry revenues back up to the heady heights of where it was last seen in probably the late 90s. So as you can see here on this, Spotify launches and we just about start to get a bit of a uplift by the time get to like 2014, 2015, we're starting to get into a matured state and there's a lot of money sloshing around in the music industry. And I think this is why, in a sense, playlists occupy so much of everyone's thinking, for better or worse, when it comes to digital music. Spotify, here we go. So yeah, we're going to focus on this platform mainly because everyone's got access to it. You can get a free account. If you don't have access to your own artist on Spotify for Artists, it's easily done, well worth doing, and you can do your own pitching within there, and we'll go into little steps and things like that. So Spotify launched in 2008 across parts of Europe. There was no real playlist ecosystem at the very beginning. Everything was just sort of focused on the products that were there. You could listen to them, replicate your digital libraries like you had in iTunes and all that sort of stuff. Because they didn't have an ecosystem, third-party systems grew quickly, like playlist.net in 2009, which was then bought by Sony not long afterwards. And then Spotify launched in the US in 2011 when everything went hyper guns pretty much. So yeah, as I said, we'll focus on Spotify for the core chat, reasons being ease of pitching and access to streaming data via Spotify for artists, not only for yourself, but also other artists. You can look at their streaming overall daily numbers, not necessarily on each song, but also their followers and their monthly listeners and all that sort of stuff. Similarly for yourself, you can look at your play count, monthly listeners, follower numbers. All these things are visible, which is a great thing, but it also adds additional pressure as a measure to be seen to be succeeding on the platform. And due to the sheer scale of Spotify, its playlist ecosystem, the amount of users around the world and so on, it really is the outlier by a long way. It's at least double the size of Apple Music at this point. 356 million users, 158 million subscribers, and it's available in nearly 200 countries in the world. So this is why we'll be looking at it. In terms of pitching, the process and info required for this is basically the same, as I say, on Spotify as it is for Apple, Amazon, Deezer, Tidal, and all that sort of stuff. Primarily for those other platforms, your distributor will need to handle that sort of pitching process. But if you are self-distributing or you self-manage, there are resources on how you can do that effectively with the most up-to-date tools available through the Music Managers Forum. Right. Before we get into playlist detail, one thing I have to stress, and it sounds boring, but getting on playlists is not a substitute for having a marketing strategy. And getting added to a playlist isn't by itself going to alter the course of your career. For example, here, we see a clip from Spotify for artist redacted here. But as an artist I work with who has around 5 million streams with around about 100,000 monthly listeners, most of these generated from playlist editions. But in terms of fans, there's probably about 100 people in the UK, and this is a UK artist, that would spend any money on this artist, like buying vinyl or merchandise or whatever. So whilst these streams and these numbers look fantastic, and they are, these streams and playlist editions alone are not creating any fans. This is just one sort of aspect that's fortunate for this artist, is fueling the ability to make additional recordings and things like that, but has not broken through, has not been able to enable this artist to, take additional steps necessarily in terms of fan creation. Pragmatic case for playlists. Oh, actually, I should say, sorry, I'm going to have to get rid of it. I should say on this one, there's a danger here, though, in that as good as it is to be on these playlists and stuff like that, should all these songs be removed from this playlist at any given point, or the playlist infrastructure be deleted or anything like that, there would be no plays for this artist, full stop. Like, the one thing that's propping up the entire artist currently is these playlist editions, which is bringing some revenue in. But as soon as that stops, hopefully it won't, but if it does, then they are at the ground again. So that's not a healthy position to be in my opinion. And arguably it's worse than it appears in a sense, because if you look at the 75% there, where it says 75% editorial playlists and 10% Spotify algorithmic playlists, if all those 75% editorial playlists went away, the algorithmic playlist would have a knock-on effect as well. Like, that would drop immediately, and then relatively quickly further after that, because of the fact the editorial playlist daily amount is adding to those tracks being active, which is signaling to the algorithmic playlist that they're active. So as soon as they stop being active as far as daily plays goes, the algorithms can stop looking at them as well. So bit of a danger zone there, but yeah, I'm not trying to scare anyone, just a bit of a fact. But pragmatically, playlists are good in a number of different ways, depending on how your marketing plan or your business strategy is laid out. Plays achieved via playlists are normally plays on top of your organic listeners, i.e., in a sense, bonus plays. Plus, the more listeners you have organically or via playlist plays, the more data that's going into the algorithm, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The more plays a song, an album, or a catalog have, the more income is generated. For example, a distributor or a label that achieves 1 million Spotify plays a day across its catalogue is netting around about £4,000 a day. From an artist perspective, this could mean that playlisting may help pay for recording or future marketing material, like I mentioned for the previous artist. And then, of course, there's validation as well. You know, if you get added to a playlist, people like to trump about it. You know, they shout about it on social media, and it can be a bit of a thing. You know, you can say that you've started to get recognition from a gatekeeper in the industry. So it's a bit like being added to X Festival bill or getting a radio player by, you know, YDJ or whatever. It can add to the picture of wider support for your project. Okay. Now on to how to pitch, best practices. I fear I'm rocketing through this because I get nervous when I'm doing this stuff. So if you have questions, I would love to chat to you about them afterwards. I think I'll probably do better at that than just waffling. So anyway, best practices. We're not getting into the mechanics of actually how you go around pitching a song on Spotify or on Apple or anything like that, but roughly the same process is there. You know, you need the tracks need to be delivered for one. You need to know what the context is for your release in terms of why you've made it and what is going on with your campaign and all that sort of thing, and what genre it is, which we can get into, and any press and promo and stuff like that. It's relatively simple stuff. It just needs to be done in advance. Right, so some of these things in terms of the best practices, they're assuming that you do wish to up your presence on streaming services. If you don't want that, then you might not find these pointers particularly interesting, but I think that they're relatively interesting, obviously, if you do want to do that. And yeah, hopefully they're unique-ish takes on it. You can search Spotify best practice for pitching on Google, and you'd find myriad articles. So here's some more. If you're releasing an album, set up the album release at the same time as you're doing all the other long lead things, such as making CDs, finishing the press release, etc. Spotify say that they only listen to music that's delivered into Spotify, i.e. if you email any of those editors a SoundCloud link or a YouTube link or something like that that says, can you listen to my song in advance? They can't click on it, they won't be able to listen to it. They only can listen to music that's in there, so you need to send them your artist link and say, I've delivered my new music, it's in here. And the sooner it's in, the better. So got an album out at the end of the year, get it delivered in as soon as you possibly can. You can figure out the singles in advance, fine, but just get that album in there just so it's done. And then as you're communicating through, it's always there for them to refer to if they need to, when they get time. You can only pitch one track at a time. So focus in advance on the upcoming song that you've got. Sorry, phone ringing again. My apologies. Yeah, you can only pitch one track at a time, but you can release as many tracks as often as you like. So for example, if you've got a record coming up, let's say this example here in October, this is an actual release that's upcoming, you can, yeah, get 3 or 4 advanced tunes in there staggered out. This one's relatively staggered in the sense because the May track and the August track are both going to radio, so we need to give it a bit of space. But then there's after August, there's a September one, which is specifically for streaming, and then we'll pitch a track on top for the album release in October. So the October album release, that's already been delivered in, and the May single has already been delivered in. We just need to nail down the 6th of August and the 3rd of September, or thereabouts what dates those are definitely going to be, but it's going to be within those weeks. So yeah, so with the 26th of May one, for example, that's been pitched now, that's just got delivered the end of last week, so that's been now pitched, and we'll be able to pitch the 6th of August track from the 26th of May once the 26th of May release is out, if that makes sense. Best practice number 3, tickle the algorithm. Apologies for the terminology there, I was just thinking of ways to, yeah, make that sound interesting instead of talking about algorithms all the time. So really, the trick is to encourage the audience to listen to your music on Spotify, and this also applies to Apple as well. Their algorithm is relatively powerful, but there's less data available, like in terms of saves and all that sort of stuff. So again, as we're just focusing on Spotify because there's further breadth of information that you can find. So encourage your audience to listen on Spotify and to follow your profile. Algorithmic playlists are huge, like so Release Radar, Discover Weekly, the radio shows, your daily mix and all that sort of stuff. Plus there are around about 60,000 tracks uploaded to Spotify every day. And by that, I mean every single platform, every single day. So it's impossible for the editors to listen to all of these tracks in their entirety. They're going to need help to filter the songs, artists, and campaigns. So by sending people to your profile to follow it, or to play a playlist that you've created, or to simply play an album of yours, the more data that our algorithm has from activity on your profile, the better. So this is an example here is of an artist I started working with in July of last year. We were lucky enough that this artist makes quite breezy indie folk, and that sort of sound is chiming with editors at the moment, sort of like Arlo Parks, Lana Del Rey sort of vibe. And the songs were added to playlists. What we discussed, the artist, I, and their manager, was that we should run some adverts on social media once we noticed the playlists were going to stick around for a couple of weeks, so we could, feed people in to, show the algorithm that people are interested. Artists not particularly good on social media either. They couldn't go out there every single day and say, follow my Spotify profile. They just wouldn't have had that sort of ability in them without feeling ashamed. So we got the adverts to do that for them. And over the course of the EP rollout, EP was released in October of last year. So that was a 4-month run up in total, including the follow-up in October. We ran adverts throughout that whole period. We only spent a couple of £100 in total, but the combination of the playlist ads, which increased the followers, plus the fact that we ran some adverts which sent probably 1,000, maybe 1,500 people to the profile from various places around the world over that period. And the fact that there's been new music already in 2021 and all that sort of stuff has empowered not only longer term communications about the artist with editors at DSPs, which is primarily a one-way conversation, by the way. It's not, they're not particularly keen on sticking their head over the parapet and saying, yeah, let's have a chat, because they're so busy. But it's also shown the algorithm, the artist page, and is being interacted with, and the music is being interacted with as well. So as far as I can tell, this is making the artist sort of higher profile and floating higher in the 60,000 tracks delivered a day, so they're able to check that artist. So yes, fingers crossed that will continue through this year. Even if not, we started the campaign on 1.5 thousand followers, as you can see there, in July, and we're on 5,000 followers now. And you could see for the previous 5 years, it was a pretty slow incline. So yeah, it's a good example to see when the concerted effort's gone in, that you can grow those followers, and each one of those people are real followers, not bots and stuff like that. So every time there's a new song, all those people will get it on Release Radar, which will give it a Good Friday algorithmic push. Metadata is always fun. So on Spotify for Artists, they just updated the metadata sections a little bit when you pitch your track, and some of it's quite beneficial. So these sections here, which have been newly expanded, can be used to more accurately depict who you are as an artist, or who the artist is, and what the song is about. Each selection that is made will refine which editor gets the pitch. So for example, you see here it says where confirmed with the artist is from. There's a hometown plus currently based. That's been newly separated, which is very interesting and is actually being very useful for a number of pitches recently. Artists might be living in the States, or they might be from Scotland and living in London, or vice versa, and that's serving it to specific editors. We don't see fully what that is, of course, but it's better than just having to just decide on one territory and hoping that's going to the right editor at that point. Plus, and you see on the add song details on the right there, you used to be able to just choose one genre, but now they've opened up all the subgenres and mixed them all together. So, if your song is a very diverse song, and this one isn't that I've selected here, but I just wanted to show you some examples. I've put in indie folk, EDM and dub, which is, you wouldn't have been able to do that under usual metadata, primary and then secondary metadata things. So, you know, that would end up floating that in theory to 3 separate editors, maybe even if it was going to serve it to a UK editor, a US editor, in each indie folk, indie, EDM and dub, that could be half a dozen people that might see it who this might be relevant to. So that's really interesting. Right. So yeah, I was having a little look around earlier because, you know, whilst traditional folk music isn't necessarily something that performs brilliantly on streaming services, because, you know, a lot of streaming is quite lean back in nature, by which I mean Spotify deliberately want you to put on a playlist and then just go off and make your tea and not be disturbed by the music, or even be interested in it in a sense. I mean that not necessarily in a bad way, but they just want it to be on. So you just go, oh, Spotify is doing a nice little job for me there. In terms of their bigger playlists, like the coffee shop ones and the chill out ones and stuff like that, there are a lot of opportunities for folk, traditional, singer-songwriter, chill, all that sort of playlist. So I had a quick scan, and across the folk world, there's a lot of coverage there. Folk is obviously a broad church, much like jazz and much like rock, but we'll have a quick through and see all the opportunities that Spotify, well, not even all, just a number of opportunities that Spotify curate and that they also host through third parties. So here we go, here's some pictures instead of some blank pages. So yeah, on here, this is quite a wide range here. So Lost in the Woods is a fairly chilled out singer-songwriter one, but can get quite rootsy. Roots Rising, a new music playlist that will update quite often with new music in general. Infinite Acoustic can be, it can be new music and old music. Fresh Folk is very specifically new music. It's almost like the New Music Friday for folk and roots and singer-songwriter. You probably wouldn't want to be in New Music Friday in a lot of cases, because that's primarily a pop playlist. And, you know, if all the Little Mix fans are on there and they heard you and it didn't work, that might even be a black mark in terms of the algorithms, you know, might just go, what, people don't like this, and that might not necessarily be true. That sounds like bad curation, not necessarily a bad song. Folk pop, I think that tells you what it says there. Then there's like classic acoustic, you know, I won't go into all of them, give you a little bit of time to scan this, but yes, you know, lots of different variations on similar themes, but, you know, getting quite delineated with how they go about putting what where and stuff like that. So lots of options. Some more options. And yeah, a lot of these ones come up under folk and acoustic, including Americana and this Indigo one, which is like the new, yeah, it says the new shade of country. So that's, you know, it's a slightly blurred boundary, but at the same time, you know, genre is evolving all the time, and some of your songs might have a country tinge, and why not? And then I had a quick look for traditional folk on Spotify, and there's absolutely bucket loads of different playlists, including some official ones here. As you can see, traditional English folk, Welsh, Scottish, there's an Italian one, there's a Greek one, and all that sort of stuff. But then there's various user playlists where people are making things, and you can generally find out who they are. You might not be able to find out their contact details and things like that, but you know, if you're able to get their details from their Spotify thing and have a look online, they might have a website or a profile via Submit Hub or someone like that, where you might be able to get in touch with your music. And yeah, just to show you the depth of various playlists that are available. Onto something completely different now. Third-party playlists. So further to some of these are third-party playlists. In fact, most of these ones here are, aside from the instrumental Celtic folk and the Spanish tapas bar. The outside of the official playlist, there are thousands of companies and individuals creating various playlists that your music might be suited to, as was just shown. These individuals are making Spotify and YouTube playlists of alternative, dance, folk, pop, chill, sleep, focus, you name it, primarily of new music, but there are, you know, places where they want to make classic, deep catalogue playlists and stuff like that. A number of these people you can connect via their websites, whilst loads of them are on Submit Hub, or you can find them on Twitter, and there's various places to do it. You can like scrape the detail from places, you know, and some people offer, you know, PDFs with people's details on and stuff like that, but it goes out of date relatively quickly. And you don't really want to be spamming people either. So I guess best thing to do is to try and form a relationship with any of these people if you can, through regular, good quality contact, and just see how you go. So I've pointed out like a couple of ones at the bottom here, so like Indie Mono, Alex Rainbird, and Double J Music, all of which sort of sit on the edge of singer-songwriter, folk, and they'll put new music up there, they'll put them up on YouTube and add them to their Spotify playlists, which some of them aren't as impactful necessarily as being added to, you know, Fresh Folk or something like that on the actual official Spotify end, but it will raise your numbers, and it will get, you know, people go there to listen to new music, and they, you know, they like the taste that these third parties curate and stuff like that. So you can find some fans there, some additional followers. You can get the algorithm to notice that you're being listened to and all that sort of stuff, and that can kickstart the process. So that's all really good. And then there are sort of hybrid opportunities in a sense, such as Folkhampton, where radio host and presenter Chris Thorpe Tracy, he's looking out for new and underrepresented music in the folk scene to play on his radio show, Folkhampton, but then he'll also add the music to his New Folk Friday playlist on Spotify as well. So, you know, have a look out for those, see if these people have Spotify playlists that they are willing to add things to, and mention it to them. You know, like, everyone's busy, everyone needs a prompt. Right, conclusions. Now, there's lots to talk about in general, but yeah, I'll just waffle on a tiny bit more, and then hopefully I'll stop boring you. So I don't work for any of these streaming services, but I do use Spotify and Apple Music, and I have done since day dot with both of them. Given how essential that streaming is to the financial health of the overall recorded music industry, it's likely that streaming and playlisting will be around in a similar form for years to come. Due to the sheer volume of tracks that's being released, the more editors will rely on the algorithm to help them see user and consumption signals on specific songs and artists. So if you're able to get on some curated playlists and this helps fuel your growth, great. But if not, it's not the end of the world, in my opinion. In a lot of ways, streaming services, whilst a gatekeeper, are also a fairly accurate barometer of what public interest is. And if you have a healthy audience who consume your work on streaming services or elsewhere, that's the strongest position to be in, rather than being reliant purely on playlisting. So when trying to grow an artist's career, I'm trying to think about sustainability whilst thinking about how you can get some decent exposure from playlists. And if your ambitions are bigger than simply being on playlists, then you should treat any exposure from playlisting as a bonus rather than the primary goal. Also, crassly, the medium is used primarily by younger people, however you want to define that. And they listen to a lot of pop and R&B, and the biggest playlists which have the biggest impact are in these genres like rap, caviar and stuff like that. These are actual like cultural taste making sort of things. And we're not discussing these sorts of things, and I wouldn't even know how to go about discussing that even if I had a relevant artist. But there are a lot of good mood and genre playlists for folk, roots, Americana, coffee shop, lounging, autumn acoustic and all that sort of stuff, which I showed you a bit earlier, all of which are of a decent size. And it doesn't really matter if they got decent follower numbers, but like, people listen to them, they check it out every Friday or whenever it's updated. And those are probably better places for a lot of this music that you're making to be than it is, say, New Music Friday. As I say, like, that could in fact be a bad place for you to be. You know, a 10-poll playlist like that may be the worst place for your music compared to an appropriate genre or mood curated playlist or a third-party playlist. There's some links at some places I mentioned. Music Managers Forum, Spotify did a big blog with lots of people's questions, bit of a timeline, and then some further, people that you can get in touch with to send your music to. This is non-exhaustive, of course. There's actually hundreds of people you can get in touch with, but in terms of folk singer, songwriter, and things like that, there we are. And then that's all I've got written here, but I'm happy to chat more.
Thank you very much for that, Brad. That was really interesting. Loads of stuff that I've picked up on there. And we've got quite a few questions in the chat, which is great, and I have a few myself as well. I think yeah. Well, I'll start with one that I just kind of wanted to eke out a bit more from there. We're talking about effectively, I've heard it described as active and passive listeners, and you were saying about how being on a playlist isn't a substitute for marketing. It seems to me that by getting on, especially an edited playlist, Spotify want people just to put it on in the background, and they don't want to hear anything necessarily that's going to make them go, well, what's that, and skip it on. So you mentioned at the end about algorithms. Do you think that ultimately for Spotify edited playlists, the algorithm is going to be the single primary factor in selection ultimately, rather than anyone actually listening to a track and thinking, yeah, that sounds right?
No, not necessarily. Having been at talks with Spotify editors and stuff like that, they will admit sometimes they will choose stuff that they want to have on the playlist, and it may be wrong, and they understand the idea that it could be bad curation as much as anything else, So I don't I don't think they want to rely too much on the algorithms, and they do want to be able to put their own personal taste in and be advocates for new music and different forms of music and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of passion with a lot of the editors. Obviously at a business level, there's people that can be quite dislikable, any multinational corporation, but I think the editors there are very well-meaning and stuff like that. And yeah, I think they want to use the algorithm as a filtering tool more than as the primary. But also the algorithm has delivered a lot of amazing results. I should have got a screen grab of it a bit earlier, but that other artist who I showed with where we've managed to get relatively good increase in follower numbers, the algorithmic playlist, and this artist, I should say, is probably on about 15 curated playlists across about a dozen songs. But the Discover Weekly and the radio and stuff like that, it pretty much equals the plays that come from the curated playlist at this point. So that's averaging it out. So that would mean if those playlists stopped, Spotify just decided we're just changing the playlist policy entirely, and they just kept it as algorithmic, that artist should remain in a relatively good position. So long answer, which I'm not sure answered your question at all. But
I think what you've said is it gives me a little bit of hope that I think there's a perception that this is only going to become more and more automated and more based on digital and on the algorithms. But you're suggesting actually your experience is that sooner or later people do actually want to listen to it somewhere down the line before it gets put on those playlists, that there is a human intervention.
It seems to be, yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I'm in the more niche end of the pool. I'm not talking about huge artists, major label artists with huge things and stuff like that, where I'm sure the business decisions are very clinical and all that sort of stuff. I do think at the level that we're playing at and with the type of music we're playing with, people are going to want to hear a melodic and emotional response to a lot of this stuff, and that does conversely also mean non-offensive in some instances as well. They're going to want to make some playlists deliberately very relaxing, so you can sit in the coffee shop and not be interrupted in your conversation, have a very pleasant thing. And that doesn't devalue the music necessarily. I think that's adding to the experience of society and all that sort of stuff. But yeah.
That's great. So I'm going to start on top of these questions here, and I've also got some extras I've been emailed through if we get to them. The first one is a very specific one. You showed a graph which showed an artist rising to 5,000 Spotify followers. How does that compare with their other social media followers? And is there any kind of consistency or link between those things?
No, it feels like the link between social media followers broke about 5 years ago. They used to be able to sort of bring everything up together relatively, with Facebook really taking the charge for a little while. And now it's almost impossible to grow Facebook followers compared to other places. It just changes all the time. It is a bit quirky, I think, when you do see, some artists have got great followers on one platform and then nothing on other ones. It can look a bit suspicious every so often. But yeah, everything has to be sort of treated separately. I feel like because there's so many places to communicate and express yourself to the audience, you have to sort of pick on like the one or two or maybe up to three that you can really do. It'll be hard to bring all 5 or 6 platforms up with parity.
So you think that actually it's not suspicious if an artist has got really high Spotify follows and then really high Instagram likes or something, but low elsewhere. That's just the way that they've chosen that.
That's certainly, if it were the case that that artist had really high Instagram and really high Spotify, but really low Facebook, that would indicate to me that they've got quite a young audience. Based on how hard it is, even with quite Facebook traditional artists to get the number, because you're seeing the posts being promoted. There's very little incentive to actually like pages on Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question here: are Spotify adverts worth it? Do they help with playlisting your music?
As in adverts on Spotify, served within Spotify.
I think so. That's the question. Just the Spotify adverts, I guess. Maybe I'll just invite Adi to chat. Bear with me a second. Adi, why don't you come and ask this question on here? There you go. You should be able to unmute now and ask. Or not.
Fair enough. I have run in the past. There was a couple of occasions where there was some inventory available from having a catalog delivered into Spotify, and they would divvy out essentially credits, I suppose, weighted to the amount of the size of the client you are, about running adverts, essentially audio adverts, like radio adverts, almost like like the car garage one you hear on the local radio, within Spotify, to push people to it. And the results were unbelievably pitiful. Like it was barely worth making the audio advert for the amount of clicks that they got.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I can't, and it wasn't a bad advert, I'm sure. So, and I say we ran it a couple of times across different artists. I think it's just people know when there's an advert on and people just sort of switch off. And I think like the most engaged music listeners are probably subscribers generally. Not because they necessarily want to support Spotify, they just at some point get fed up of listening to adverts and also when you're listening to music on Spotify as a non-subscriber, you don't have any controls over like listening to a playlist in the order that the playlist is there. It automatically plays on random and all that sort of stuff, so your user experience is pretty poor. So yeah, if you like music, you want to have decent functionality pretty quick. So yeah, it was pretty bad in terms of adverts off Spotify driving people to it. You can get people to go to the platform via adverts and stuff like that, but at the same time, if you were going to measure it against what the cost per click is, for example, versus what you end up getting out at the end of it of streams, you'd think it's a demented endeavor, but if it was part of what if what you were trying to do in the long run was to build your follower numbers, based on you're going to have 2 years worth of music coming out, something new every 2 months or something like that, and you wanted to show the algorithm what was going on and be able to have commercial conversations with the editors saying like, look at this growth that's being achieved and all that sort of stuff, which is has always been part of selling in music, as well as like, do you like the song? Then you can do that relatively inexpensively, because Spotify's in nearly 200 territories. You can do adverts very cheaply outside of the UK and Europe and the US. It's not necessarily where you would go touring in those smaller markets and stuff like that, but that you can serve adverts from Facebook Ad Manager and Google much cheaper outside of those markets, and those are still listeners.
Yeah, great. I'm just also reading through a few of these other questions here that have come in. There's quite a few asking a bit more detail about pitching to non-Spotify playlists.
Yes.
What is there a formal process for that? You seem to indicate it was just trying to find out who it is that's running them and then get in touch with them.
But yeah, I don't have any formal processes that I'm aware of, but then I don't focus upon that. I'm mainly working on my campaigns, and if people want additional help with that, I'll look into it with them. But yeah, they're gonna have to I'm going to have to support them rather than me run it and then them support me generally. So I don't, there might be, I don't know the answer to that, but generally speaking, Submit Hub seems to be a decent way of going about having a look there. You know, there's a lot, you can filter on Submit Hub as to who has a Spotify playlist and who shares onto Spotify, whether you're just looking for blog coverage and all that sort of stuff. So you can buy some credits to get in touch with people on that relatively inexpensively. And it's quite a labor, relatively easy in terms of labor to get those pictures out to people there. You know, and the Double J, for example, and Indie Mono and stuff like that, you can do that on their website. And there must be tons more examples of those. Those are like the obvious ones that just jumped into my head.
Yeah, I think it seems to me from speaking to a number of other artists that it's about doing your research into which playlist first and then working out what's the best route for that. But
yeah, no one likes getting the dear and then multiple asterisks because they've forgotten to put your name in their mail out, do you? You just feel like, oh, this person's a chump. They don't really care who they're emailing. It just feels a bit embarrassing for them, and you don't feel like it's worth your time because they haven't done it right. So it is worth doing a bit of research. You know, it's not worth emailing 200 people because realistically it's not going to be that many people. Like some of the people that have created these third-party playlists have just done it for their own sakes, and they've just picked up a bit of head of steam because people like what the sequence is, but they might not have any interest in being pitched, so you might not be able to find their information. Some people want to hear new music, like Chris Thorpe Tracy on his Folkehampton one. You know, he's a good.
Yeah, I think what you've described there is similar. We had a talk on A&R last week. And, it seems very similar that actually just blanket sending out a load of stuff to a load of people without really thinking about who you're sending it to is likely to lead to nothing getting picked up. Whereas actually going through and picking that up seems to be the right kind of way.
It's an emotional thing, isn't it? Music fandom and wanting to support music as well. You know, like you want to feel like you've got that person's back and that they care and stuff like that. And it's not just the cold, like, I'm just sending you something and you get shouted at if you don't support it. You know, like just no one's got the time or the money for that.
Yeah. Does it always need to be a new release single to be pitched, or does it look bad or good if you pitch singles that have been released for a while?
There isn't a formal process within Spotify specifically to pitch something that's already been released. There is sort of informal processes, or if your distributor might have a process, if you're able to, you know, if there's some stuff that's happened in the past, or no, sorry, if your songs come out and some stuff started to happen, like you've had a sync or there's been some decent radio play or you've got a tour to announce or something like that, you should be able to let your distributor know, and then they can let you know, Spotify and Apple and places like that know. You know, if you're an artist manager, you'll have access to get in touch with the sort of like the catch-all email address at Spotify where you can send updates and stuff like that. Obviously, you don't want to drown that email address because otherwise they'll start looking at your inbox, your name in the inbox, and probably start flagging you as a spammer and stuff like that. But yeah, there's ways to send updates, but you can't formally pitch tracks that have already been released if they've already been on the platform and they've got a play count and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, that stuff that's where the algorithm sort of comes in as well, because if something is sort of floating up, you know, some Shazams are happening from radio play, or you know, people are starting to save it and share it and stuff like that, it will get noticed, and that's a good moment to start, you know, seeing if you can get in touch with people and get it noticed.
But this all seems to form part of the planning, and it's a theme emerging already so far in these lectures. These conversations have been about putting all your ducks in a row before you put your music out and thinking it through properly. And it seems that's a really key part of getting playlisted here. Yeah,
absolutely is. Yeah, you do need to ignore the fact that the music industry is imbued with this wonderful like magic Shazam sort of thing that happens, just like I just magic this thing up and everyone's surrounding it, pointing at it and going, wow, what a thing of wonder, which is obviously true when it happens, but you don't show people the work that goes in advance. You just show them the sleight of hand of ta-da, this thing's arrived. So the more preparation you can do in advance, the more hopeful wonder will occur when you do the reveal.
Yeah,
that was one of my crappiest analogies. Yeah,
look, it made sense to me.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit more about the difference between Spotify monthly listeners versus Spotify followers?
Yes, I can. So, I don't know the full ins and outs of exactly how the monthly listeners are calculated, but my rough calculation is that they're based on the rolling total of people that listened to any song of yours anywhere on the platform, whether it's on your profile or on a playlist or on radio or whatever, within the last 28 days. And the followers are people, irrespective of whether they've listened to you ever or listen to you all the time, people that are going to get who've said they want to get updates of what you're doing, so that every time you release a song, in theory, it should be in their release radars, which get refreshed every Friday for every person, and it will sort of form the taste. You know, it will say this person likes all these artists and this sort of thing and stuff like that, and it will start to refine similar sounding things or stuff that you might like based on other users' follows and saves and all that sort of stuff. So it is the followers is almost like the more sustainable measure in a sense. You know, like if an artist was going to come to me and say I've got 50,000 followers, rather than no, it'd be like, wow, you've got a really a big sort of diving board basically to springboard from. You know, everything's sort of set there, and you can really build from that, because you know that there's that many people that are engaged enough to have clicked follow. And even if you didn't get any playlisting, like curated playlisting at that point, you know that algorithmically and from the organic fans you've got, that'd be fine. And if those 50,000 followers were literally the only people that ever listened to you, you'd still have 50,000 monthly listeners, and that sounds like a pretty decent place to be as well. Sometimes the monthly listeners can be really skewed, of course. Like if you're an artist whose songs is everywhere in playlists and stuff like that, your monthly listeners is going to be totally huge, but it may not bear any relationship to the followers. I think the followers sort of builds over time as you become more established.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know? So you run Singing Like Music. How do you decide which artists to work with, or how does an artist know when they're ready to engage an organization like yours?
I don't know. I mean, I can answer that question in terms of when would an artist know. Quite often they think they're ready straight away, and that's one of the I couldn't tell. I'm not a creative, so it's definitely not my place to say. I don't know. When are they ready as well? That's a good question.
I mean, we've had a couple of questions in the Q&A and separately about, you know, when should people be paying to try and get access to playlists? When should they be using third parties?
Oh, yes.
When should they be putting some money in, some of their, you know, their money that they're planning on a marketing campaign into this?
Good question there. I think, well, one definite thing to not do, well, if anyone gets in touch with you and says, I'll put you in X, Y, and Z playlists, and you're tempted by it because you're wanting to kickstart a process or whatever, and you know there's reasons why you might want to do that, it just be 100% sure and double check and all that sort of thing. These plays are not generated through bots, because if they are generated through bots, Spotify probably will notice at some point and may even remove those songs from Spotify, and that's just no fun for anyone, and it will look embarrassing, and you won't get paid for those streams and stuff like that, and you'll have spent the money on things. There are, of course, like farms, I suppose, where people do click play, you know, play and stuff like that, but the value of having a play is hopefully someone being at the end of it, going, I like that, and hitting follow and hitting save and adding it to their library, and people go back to their library. And you know, when you hit the search button on Spotify or on Google, unless you know what you're looking for, it's just like, oh God, what do I search for? It's too big. So people tend to go into their libraries and have a look around, and if you're in there, then you're more likely to get played than just like a random search and stuff like that. So as nice as it is to get plays, if you're not getting saves and follows and stuff like that, it doesn't mean that much in terms of artist growth.
Yeah. What about in terms of, you mentioned in the very first example you put across, one artist had a lot of their Spotify plays through edited playlists. What's the turnover on those playlists like? Does Spotify move people on quite regularly, or once you're on, are you on?
So in that instance, this artist is quite lucky in that it's pretty chilled out music, and those playlists aren't they are, whilst they're relatively new music focused, they're new music in that this stuff that's come out and is up to 3 or 4 years old or something like that before they start thinking, oh well, we'll have a look at other tracks and stuff like that. So the turnover on those ones, those playlists update once every 2 months or something like that, and quite often if the track's performing well on those playlists, i.e. it's not getting skipped or people are saving it from the playlist or whatever, then you might just stay in the shuffle for the next time. So this artist has stayed in for on a couple of these playlists for like a year and a half, which is great. But like as I was warning, if that stopped, then the house of cards sort of falls. But yes, the bigger playlists like New Music Friday and the pop ones, and even like Fresh Folk, which is the American alternative Americana sort of singer-songwriter one, that does refresh every single week. It might keep some stuff in there for 2-3 weeks or whatever, but it will drop down because they'll put the new releases at the top. So yeah, the new music ones, the turnover is pretty quick, and those more genre related ones that you can stay in there for months.
Okay, and for third party platforms like Submit Hub, how does that actually work? What do they do that artists can't do on their own?
Well, I think a lot of the people, so what they do is they help connect the two, so like yourself and the curator or the blogger or whatever. I think I can't speak for exactly why these things exist. It exists obviously for money, doesn't it? But what the function of it probably was to stop people getting Excel files of people's email addresses and just creating lists and just going, add me to this, or use my song for this, or blah blah blah. So it's basically put a barrier in between the two, where you have to select what you want to send and who you want to send it to, and you've got a limited amount of people you want to send it to. Or if you want to send it to unlimited people, you pay for the privilege, but for the paying for the privilege, that person at the other end has to respond. So that's how that works. Their response can be no, but a lot of the time people have sort of hidden their email addresses or don't respond to it, and they say we'll only speak to you through this, through this gatekeeper, just to sort of minimize the contact is what my hunch of it is. And that's how it works. Basically, you just put your information in, put the track in, put a bit of context in, and refine who you think would like it best based on your research, and hit submit, and fingers crossed.
It seems to me that when you're saying about 60,000 tracks uploaded in a day and things, that actually we shouldn't be expecting responses back from editors of any playlist, because they must be bombarded with stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So we're reaching the end of our the Q&A and the time we have here. But I think it seems to me the top tips that you've put forward there seem to be about doing your research, planning things carefully, and making sure the timings are right. Anything else that you think are absolutely essential for people to take away with?
I think if growing your profile on digital profiles is important, I think both Spotify and Apple, their internal algorithms based on people visiting the profile and pressing play and stuff like that, it is really powerful. It's deceptively powerful. So if that is something you want, you are gonna have to send people there. That can be done within the mix of, please buy some merchandise and please buy my CD and stuff like that. It's about staggering out how you make these communications. And sometimes your proposition might be, go listen to this playlist I've made on my profile, rather than go and listen to my song, because like there might be it might be better to sort of switch up how you do that. But I think if you're wanting to grow it, you need to get people to like and follow and save regularly, and just be creative about how you do that without driving people nuts. And being in order to do that, you have to be organized, don't you, in terms of like when stuff's coming out and getting everything scheduled and making sure it's not getting in the way of your sales that you need to achieve as well. Because if people now are going to be out on the road, they're going to need to sell tickets and albums and drive their streaming and get people to follow them on social media and all that sort of stuff. So that requires organization.
Great. There you go. One more quick thing. Is that a Cumberland Arms t-shirt I see you wearing?
It is.
Oh, I miss that pub so much.
Me too.
Fantastic place. One day soon. Thank you so much for your insight and for your expertise today.